The night my daughter-in-law slapped me across the face in my own front hall, I didn't say a word. The next morning, I got up before dawn and cooked the biggest dinner that house had seen in years. And when she walked in and saw the table set, she actually smiled and said, "See, Louis, you finally figured out your place." She had no idea who I'd already invited to sit at the head of it. If you ever bled yourself dry for people who looked at everything you built and saw nothing but a payday they hadn't collected yet, then stay with me, because this one is for you. Hit that like button for an old man who learned the hard way, and do me a favor. Tell me down in the comments what part of this country you're watching from. I want to know I'm not the only one. I came in out of the snow that night the way I'd come in 1,000 times, stamping the slush off my boots on the mat my late wife picked out at a church bazaar in 1991. New Edinburgh in February is a particular kind of cold, the wet Ottawa cold that gets into the joints, and my knees had been singing all the way home from the river path. I hadn't even got my coat off when I heard the slap of paper hitting glass. My daughter-in-law was standing in the middle of the front room I'd paneled with my own 2 hands, holding a glass of red wine in one hand and pointing at a stack of documents on the coffee table with the other. "Sign it," she said. "Not Dad. Not even Mr. Whelan," which is what she'd called me at the wedding when she still wanted something from me she hadn't gotten yet. Just my first name, flat, the way you'd say it to a contractor who'd shown up late. My son was in the wingback chair by the window, 40 years old, a grown man, and he was looking at the floor like a kid who'd broken a window with a baseball. He wouldn't lift his eyes to me. He just kept turning his wedding ring around and around with his thumb. I walked over and picked up the top page. I didn't need my reading glasses to know what it was. I'd signed enough of them in 50 years of building to recognize a transfer of land when I saw one. Quit the title. Hand it over. All of it. For the grand sum of $1. This house, the stone house I bought half-finished in 1979 and spent 2 decades making whole. The house where I carried my wife over the threshold and 31 years later where I sat beside her in a rented hospital bed in the dining room and held her hand until it went cool. "You want me to put my name to this," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "It's not really your house anymore, is it?" she said, and stepped toward me. The wine sloshed. "It's a liability. You're a liability. You're 68 years old, Louis. You rattle around in $3 million of real estate like a ghost while this family goes under. Owen needs the equity. We need it. You're sitting on a gold mine doing absolutely nothing with it while we drown." Drown. I looked at my son. I handed him that company free and clear when I retired. Whelan Construction, paid off to the last nail, the kind of business that printed money, as long as you got up in the morning and did the work. If they were drowning now, somebody had taken a drill to the bottom of the boat. I set the paper back down. "No," I said. You'd have thought I'd spit on the floor. Her face went a color I'd only ever seen on a man having a heart attack on a job site. "What did you just say to me?" I said, "No, I'm not signing my home over to you. I'm not going into a home so you can cash me in like a savings bond." My son finally spoke, and God help me, his voice cracked. "Dad, come on, don't make this hard. She's just stressed. Things are tight. If we could just borrow against the house, we could fix everything. You don't even use the upstairs." He sounded like a beggar. The boy I'd taught to frame a wall and read a level, reduced to begging me to rob myself so he could cover whatever hole he'd dug. "I'm going to bed," I said. "We're done." I didn't see her hand come up. I felt it. The slap landed flat across my cheek and knocked my glasses clean off my face, and they skittered across the oak floor I'd refinished on my hands and knees the summer my wife was first sick. The whole room went silent. You could hear the wind coming off the river, working at the old windows. My son didn't move. That's the part that still sits in me. He didn't stand up. He didn't say a thing. He watched his wife strike his father, and he stayed in that chair like a man nailed to it. "Pick them up," she said, pointing at my glasses on the floor, "and sign the papers. Stop being a stubborn old fool and do something for this family for once in your life." I bent down. My back cracked loud enough to hear, and when I reached out for those glasses, my hand was shaking, but it wasn't fear. I looked at that hand on the cold floor, the knuckles all swollen and knotted, the white scar across 2 fingers from a saw that jumped in 1981, the burn on the wrist from pulling a kid out from under a collapsed scaffold the year my son was born. These were the hands that signed his hockey registration, that signed the check for his university, that wrote out $40,000 for the wedding where this woman wore white and promised in front of God to love my family. And now they were down on the floor picking up a pair of glasses she'd knocked off my face. I could have stood up and thrown the both of them out into the snow. I want you to understand, I had the strength to do it. I was old, but I wasn't soft. But I looked at her smug face and his coward's eyes, and I understood that yelling would buy me nothing. They didn't fear my voice. They'd stopped hearing it years ago. They thought I was a doddering old man standing between them and money. So I decided to become the only thing left that could scare them, the quiet one, the one who stops arguing and starts planning. I put my glasses back on. The room came clear. I looked her dead in the eye, and she actually flinched, braced for me to hit her back. I didn't raise a finger. "Fine," I said. She blinked. "Fine what?" "Fine. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm too old for this place. Maybe I don't understand how money works anymore." Her mouth started curling into a smile, slow and ugly, the smile of something that thinks the hunt is over. But I'm not signing it on a coffee table with snow still on my coat. This house is my whole life. If I'm handing it over, I'm doing it right. Give me one night. Tomorrow evening I'll cook a proper dinner, right here. Invite your partners, your investors, whoever you're trying to impress. I'll sign the papers in front of all of them. Let me leave this house with a little dignity. She laughed, that bark she had. "Oh, Louis and his theatrics, fine, cook your little supper. Just make sure it's signed before dessert." And she turned her back on me and went to refill her wine like she hadn't just put her hand across an old man's face. My son trailed out after her like a dog that's been kicked and keeps coming back. I stood alone in the hall I'd built. My cheek throbbed, but the loneliness I usually felt in that house was gone. What I felt instead was the quiet of a courtroom right before the gavel comes down. I went up to my room and sat on the edge of the bed and took out my phone, and my hands were steady now. I called the number I hadn't dialed in 3 years. "Louis," his voice was thick with sleep. "Murray and I went back to a framing crew in 1973 before he ever went to law school, before I ever poured a foundation. He'd been my lawyer and my friend for half a century, and he was the only man alive who knew where every dollar of mine had ever gone. Murray, something's happened. I need you tomorrow, and I need you to call that friend of yours, the one with the Crown Attorney's office." "What in God's name is going on?" "My kids want my house," I said, watching the red mark on my cheek in the dresser mirror. "And tomorrow night, over a roast and a good bottle of wine, I'm going to give it to them. And then I'm going to give them something else. Bring the file, not the transfer papers, the other ones. The ones we put together 10 years ago when I was getting my affairs in order. The whole thing." There was a long pause. Then, quietly, "Louis, who hit you?" I didn't answer. I just told him to be ready, and I hung up. I was up at 5. the way I've been up at 5 for 50 years. The only difference was the ache on the left side of my face. In the bathroom mirror, the bruise had come up overnight, a sick purple and yellow spread across the cheekbone. I touched it and I didn't feel ashamed. I felt clear. It was proof, the contract between a father and a son, the unspoken one, the one about respect. It had been torn up, and now I was free of it. I went down and started cooking. I pulled out the big roasting pan, got a standing rib roast going low, started a tortilla the way my wife's mother taught me, did the potatoes, the whole spread. The smell of it filled the house, and that smell used to mean Sunday, used to mean family. That morning it was camouflage. I needed them to think I'd given up and gone back to being useful. They came down around 8, his heavy, clumsy steps, then the sharp click of her heels on the floor she always refused to take her shoes off on. They stopped dead in the kitchen doorway when they saw me at the stove, calm as anything, plating eggs. "Morning," I said without turning. "Coffee's hot." And then she did her performance. Her face folded up, her lip trembled, the tears came on cue like she'd flipped a switch. She crossed the kitchen and took my hand in both of hers, cold hands, dry, and choked out how sorry she was, how she didn't know what came over her, how it was the stress, the market, the loans, how she hadn't slept, how she loved me, how she only wanted what was best for everyone. My son chimed in from the table, eager, relieved. "She was up half the night crying, Dad. We're just scared about the future. We never meant to hurt you." I let her hold my hand. I pulled it back nice and slow and picked up my coffee. "You mentioned a plan," I said, "last night before things got out of hand." The grief vanished off her face that fast. She sat up straight, all business, and slid a glossy brochure across the counter. A retirement residence out in the West End. Sunrooms, smiling old folks playing cards, a platinum suite for $500,000, lifetime care. "You'd be a king there," she said. "Nurses, chef-made meals, people your own age, and the rest of the equity saves the business and gives little Felix a future. It's win-win, Louis." I looked at the name of that place and my blood ran cold for a reason she couldn't have guessed. 4 years back, before I fully stepped down, the outfit building that residents had come to my company asking us to put it up. I'd looked at their specs myself. They wanted to cut the fire separations. They wanted cheap cladding that wasn't rated for what they were claiming. They wanted to pack a long-term care home full of frail people into a building I wouldn't have housed cattle in. I threw them out of my office and told them to find someone with no conscience. They did. And now my daughter-in-law wanted to sell my solid stone house and lock me inside that fire trap so she could get her hands on the equity. I made my hands shake a little. I let my shoulders go down. I made myself small. "It looks nice," I said, wavering. "There's a suite open right now," she said, eyes gleaming, "but we have to move fast. We need to sign a transfer today so we can list by the weekend." I let out a long, broken sigh. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time I stopped being stubborn and helped. She squealed and clapped her hands, but I held up one finger. "Not today, though. I want to do it right. Tomorrow. The dinner, like I said, in front of your partners. I want to pass the torch the proper way." She was already calculating the optics. I could see it. A signing ceremony in front of investors would make my son look bankable, make the whole thing look clean. "That's a beautiful idea," she said. "We'll make it a celebration." I nodded and shuffled out toward the hall, slow, heavy, a beaten man. But the second I rounded the corner, I stopped, because the old hall mirror gives a clear angle back into the kitchen. She'd taken her phone out. She was typing fast, smiling to herself, and in the dark glass of the microwave behind her, I could read the message reflected plain as day. It was going to a contact, saved as one name. Desmond. I knew that name the way you know the name of a man who once tried to put you out of business. 10 years back, he'd bribed a building inspector to sit on my permits, spread word around town that I was insolvent, tried to poach my best foreman. I'd beaten him in court and outbid him on the new hospital wing and figured he'd crawl back under whatever rock he came out from. The message read, "Old man caved, signing tomorrow, book the flights, Lisbon, here we come." I stood very still in that hallway and felt something in my chest go cold and clean. She wasn't selling the house to save my son. She was selling it to leave him, to take the money and run off with the one man on earth who hated me most. And my son would be left holding the debt, the shame, and a child she was apparently planning to fly straight over. "Enjoy the view," I murmured to the empty hall. "You're going to choke on it." I told them I needed to go out for the roast and a few things you can't get just anywhere, which was a believable lie because everyone who's ever met me knows I take my cooking as serious as I take a load-bearing wall. It bought me a few hours unwatched. I didn't go to the grocery store. I drove my old truck across the river and parked it crooked outside a brick walk-up in the market where Murray's office had been since the Trudeau years. The first one. 3 flights, no elevator, gold lettering, half peeled off the frosted glass. He looked up when I came in and the welcome on his face died the second the light hit my cheek. He stood up out of his chair, slow. "Hurroo," he said, "just the one word." "It doesn't matter." "Don't you dare lie to me. I've known you 50 years. You don't walk into doors." When I didn't answer, he read it off my face. Her! The daughter-in-law. I gave the smallest nod, and Murray turned and went to the cabinet and pulled out a thick file, and he didn't say another word about it, because he knew that if I'd wanted her in handcuffs for the slap, she'd already be there. He knew I was here for something bigger. "I had a bad feeling weeks ago," I told him. "Owen's been dodging me, asking for bridge money. I asked you to quietly look at the company books. What did you find?" He poured 2 fingers of rye into a couple of mugs and slid one over. "Drink that first." I didn't. I opened the file. I'd left my son a company with $12 million in assets and not $1 of debt. What I was looking at now was a crime scene. Almost $3 million in the hole. Loans called from 2 banks, suppliers 90 days past due, and one line that stopped my heart, nearly $4 million parked in something called a digital holdings fund. He mortgaged the equipment, Murray said, leveraged the active contracts, took damn near every liquid dollar and poured it into cryptocurrency. Internet coins and pictures of cartoon apes Lewis. He bought air, and it crashed last month. It's gone. The banks want their money. He's maybe 30 days from an involuntary bankruptcy. I'd missed birthdays for that company, worked through fevers, through a broken foot one March, through the winter my wife was dying. I built schools and seniors' homes and a wing of a hospital. Real things, things that keep the rain off people, and my son traded the whole inheritance for magic beans. "He's a fool," I said, "but he's not evil. He's just weak." I told Murray about the text, about Lisbon, about Desmond. I watched him do the math, watched his jaw tighten. "She's not going under with the ship," he said. "She's looting it on the way down." "And there's a child on that ship," I said. "I need more than this before tomorrow. I need to know where she goes when she says she's at client meetings. I need to know where the money's hidden. Get me someone who isn't afraid to play dirty." He picked up the phone. I met the investigator the next afternoon in the parking lot of a hardware store out in the East End, fitting for a man like me. My whole life spent loading lumber in lots like that one. He was a quiet, granite-faced fellow named Boucher who didn't waste a word. He handed me a brown envelope, heavy as a brick, and told me I wasn't going to like it. I opened it. The first photos were ordinary. My daughter-in-law walking into a restaurant downtown, into a boutique hotel on a Tuesday afternoon, getting into a black car, and then the man in the car turned toward the camera and it was Desmond, that same slicked-back arrogance 10 years older, and my hands crushed the edges of the photos before I could stop them. The next one was taken through a window, the two of them leaning across a table, kissing, and not the nervous kind, the kind that's been going on a long time. And in the one after that, papers spread between them on the table, and even through the long lens I could read the letterhead. It was that long-term care residence. Next to it, 2 airline itineraries. "There's audio," Boucher said. He set a small recorder on the dash and pressed play. The clink of cutlery, the murmur of a restaurant, and then her voice, relaxed, in total control. "He's signing tonight, Des." I gave him the whole grieving daughter-in-law routine. Cried, told him we were drowning. He ate it up. He's even cooking us a dinner to make it official. Then Desmond smooth as oil, and the husband, he suspect anything. She laughed, and I'll hear that laugh until I die. Owen, he's an idiot. He thinks selling the house saves his stupid coins. He's got no clue the money's already routed to the Cayman account. The second the sale clears, I move it offshore and we go. A pause, and then Desmond asked the question that broke me. "And the kid?" There was a silence on that tape, a long, terrible silence. Then she said, light as anything, "He's a tough little guy. His aunt can take him, or the system can. I'm not dragging an 8-year-old to Portugal. He looks too much like his father anyway." Brashear clicked it off. The car was dead quiet. I felt a tear go down my bruised cheek, and I want to be honest with you. It wasn't for me. I didn't care that she called me a fool. I've been broke before. I could be broke again. But my grandson, the boy who sits on my lap and works the little toy excavator, who draws me pictures of buildings with crooked windows and signs them in big block letters. She was going to throw him away like a bag of bottles at the end of a long weekend, so she could drink wine in Lisbon with my oldest enemy. The sadness in me went hard. It turned into something heavy and cold and useful. I handed Boucher an envelope of cash with a bonus in it. "What are you going to do, Mr. Whelan?" he asked. "I'm going to go home," I said, "and cook a dinner, and make sure that woman never sees Portugal or anywhere else for a very long time." I made one more stop at the bank on Bank Street where I've kept my accounts since before my son was born, and I had the manager, a good man, the son of a man I used to do business with, pull copies of 3 documents, a home equity line of credit, $1.5 million borrowed against the house I still owned, in 3 separate draws, every one of them with my signature at the bottom, a signature I had never once put to paper. I went home and I cooked. I won't pretend my hands didn't shake when I tied the roast, but it wasn't fear. The dinner had to be perfect. It was, after all, going to be somebody's last meal at a free woman's table. They came down at 7 dressed like it was a gala. She had on a dress that cost more than I made in my first 6 months in the trade. She looked at the spread, the rib roast resting under foil, the torrichère, the good china my wife only used at Christmas, the bottle of 04 Cabernet I'd been saving for a day that never came, and she actually beamed. "See, Louis, you finally figured out your place? Isn't this nicer than fighting?" "It is," I said. "Sit down, there's soup to start." My son's partners never came, of course. There were no partners left. But there were 2 other place settings I'd laid that morning, at the far end, and as she went to ask about them, the front door opened on its own, the way I'd left it unlocked, and the cold came in, and so did Murray, and behind him a woman in a gray coat with a leather folder under her arm, and behind her 2 officers who did not take off their boots. "This is the Crown Attorney's office," Murray said. Ms. Lavoie, and the Ottawa police. My daughter-in-law went the color of the snow on the windowsill. My son shot up so fast, his chair went over backwards and cracked on the floor. Arrested? For what? I didn't do anything. Ms. Lavoie looked at him almost kindly. Fraud over $5,000. Forgery. Money laundering. We'll get to all of it. She set a blue folder on the table next to the untouched soup and turned to my daughter-in-law and uttering a forged document. "This is insane," my daughter-in-law said, finding her feet, finding her old bully's voice. "My father-in-law is confused. He gave me permission. He signed those papers himself. He just forgot. He's old. He's got." I reached into my jacket and dropped the bank file on the table, right on top of the transfer deed she'd shoved at me the night before. "Look at the signatures on those loans," I said. My son leaned over, white as paper. "It looks like you're writing, Dad." "Look at the slant." My voice came up and he flinched. "I'm left-handed. I've been left-handed my whole life. My letters stand straight up or fall backward, and I drag my hand across the page so the ink smears a little on the downstrokes. Look at that. The name flows forward. It was drawn by a right-handed person trying to copy me. I turned to her. "It's a good drawing, but you always did press too hard. You wanted it to look certain, so you dug the pen in. I write with a light touch. Everybody who's worked for me knows it." My son turned to his wife with horror coming up in his face like floodwater. "You forged Dad's name on our house." "He's lying," she screamed, slamming her hand on the table so the silverware jumped. "He's senile. He's making this up to frame me." Ms. Lavoie didn't raise her voice. She opened the blue folder and laid down a photograph, a still from a bank security camera, time-stamped, my daughter-in-law in sunglasses at a desk, signing a document with her right hand. "We have the footage from each draw," she said. "We have a handwriting analysis from the RCMP forensic lab matching the pen pressure to writing samples taken from your office this afternoon, and the notary who witnessed it has already given a statement. She says you paid her to look the other way. She's very interested in cooperating." The air went out of my daughter-in-law like a punctured tire. She backed up until she hit the wall. "I did it for us," she said, thin and small now, turning to my son. "Owen, tell them we agreed." "You didn't do it for us," I said. I took out my phone. There was a wireless speaker on the sideboard that she liked to play jazz through at her parties. I tapped it, and it gave a cheerful little chime as it connected. "And we don't need to argue about handwriting. Let's just let everyone hear it from you." I pressed play. The clink of cutlery filled my dining room, the murmur of a restaurant, and then her own voice, easy and confident, telling Desmond how she'd played the grieving daughter-in-law, how her husband was an idiot who'd never see it coming, how the money was already routed to the Caymans. My son's face came apart slowly, the way drywall does when the water's been getting behind it for months, and then the tape got to the part about the boy. His aunt can take him, or the system can. I'm not dragging an 8-year-old to Portugal. He looks too much like his father anyway. The room was so quiet you could hear the furnace kick on in the basement, the one I installed myself. My son made a sound I've only ever heard once before, the sound a man makes at a graveside, and he sat down right there on the floor among the pieces of his chair. The officers led her out into the snow. She looked back at me once on her way through the door I built, and there was no anger left in her, just a flat, empty terror, and I want to tell you I felt triumphant, but I didn't. I felt the way you feel when you finally tear out a wall and see how far the rot had spread, and you're just glad you caught it before the whole house came down. I didn't bail my son out, and I didn't get him a lawyer. He claimed he didn't know, and the truth is, I think he half believed it. And because he cooperated, and because the forging wasn't his hand on the page, he didn't go to prison, but he lost everything else. He works the overnight shift at a parcel depot out by the airport now, loading trucks, $15 an hour, and he lives in a basement apartment that makes the boarding house I started out in look like the Chateau Laurier. He phoned me last month and asked if he could borrow $60 for groceries until payday. I told him no. It was the hardest no I've ever said and the most necessary one. I told him payday was Friday and he'd manage until then. He went quiet and then he said, "Okay, Dad," and he managed until then. He went quiet and then he said, "Okay, Dad," and he managed. He's learning at 40 what I should have made him learn at 12, and the fault for that is half mine. I made his life too soft. I sheltered him until there was nothing underneath. She got 6 years. Desmond took a deal and gave her up to save his own skin, the way men like that always do, and he got 3. I went to the sentencing. I sat in the back in my good suit and watched her come in, and there was no fire left in her at all. My grandson lives with me now. The court gave me full custody. His father has supervised visits when the boy wants them, and so far he doesn't, not yet. He needs to work more first, Grandpa, he told me, 8 years old and saying it like a man twice his age, and I didn't argue because he's right. We're up at the river most mornings before school. On the weekends, we're down in the workshop, the room she used to stage for her parties, with the expensive rug rolled up against the wall now and the floor covered in cedar shavings. We're building a model of this house to scale, every window and every stone. I'm teaching him to read a plan, measure twice, cut once. He's got my hands. He's got my wife's stubbornness. Last Sunday we finished the roof, and it was straight and it was solid. And after he went up to wash for supper, I poured myself a glass of that Cabernet and walked over to the mantel where her photo sits. I raised the glass to her. "Well, V," I said, to the only person who ever called me by the name I called her back. It was a hell of a mess, but I cleaned it up. The most expensive thing I ever learned, I learned at 68 on the floor of my own front hall with my glasses knocked across the room, that giving and giving and giving doesn't make people grateful. It makes them hungry. I thought I was protecting my son all those years. I was just taking the iron out of him a little at a time. Your family isn't the people who happen to share your blood. It's the people who treat you with respect and have an ounce of integrity. And the day you let a relative grind your dignity into the floor in the name of family, you stop being a victim and you start being an accomplice. Sometimes the kindest thing a father can do isn't to give more. It's to look his own child in the eye and say no and mean it and let him feel the full weight of his own life in his own 2 hands. I'm 68 years old and I'm raising a boy by myself in a big stone house in the snow, and I have never once felt lonely in it since. I'm the man at the gate, and the gate is holding. If any part of this landed somewhere true for you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And tell me down below, have you ever had to cut a toxic person out of your own family to save yourself? I read every one of them. Subscribe and I'll see you back here for the next story. I keep coming back to that pair of glasses on the floor, to the cold of the oak under my knees when I bent to pick them up. Because that was the night everything turned, and not because of what she did to me, but because of what I decided to do next. I could have shouted. I could have thrown the 2 of them into the snow and felt good about it for about an hour. Instead, I stayed quiet, and in that quiet, I started thinking. And thinking is the one thing they never expected from an old man they'd already written off. Nothing in this story happened by accident. Owen lost the company because he wanted to be rich without doing the work. And a man who skips the work skips the lesson the work teaches you. His wife slapped me because I'd spent 40 years making her husband soft, and softness in a house is an open door for the kind of person who walks in looking for what they can take. Desmond came back into our lives because I'd beaten him once and never imagined a man like that forgets. Every single thing that landed on us that winter had a root I could trace back, usually to a kindness I'd handed out without ever asking the person to carry their own weight. That's the hard part to admit. I didn't just suffer what happened. In a quiet way, over years, I built the conditions for it. So if you take anything from an old man tonight, take this. Do the right thing even when no one's looking and even when it costs you, because your character is the only foundation that doesn't crack under load, and people can smell whether you got one. Use your head before you use your temper. The slap didn't beat Bridget. The patience did. The waiting, the watching her face in the microwave glass, the phone call to Murray instead of a fist, that's what won. Anger feels like strength and almost never is. And when the bad night finally comes, and it comes for everybody, have it in you to stand back up one more time than you got knocked down. I'm 68. I got hit, robbed, lied to, and nearly buried alive in a fire trap they were going to call my retirement. And I got up the next morning at 5 and cooked. Those 3 things: doing right, thinking clear, refusing to quit. They're not gifts you're born with. You build them the same way you build a house, one cold morning at a time, and you can start at any age, because I'm proof of it. I'm teaching them to my grandson now, down in that workshop, with cedar shavings on the floor and a model house coming up straight and true between us. He'll get hit someday too. Everybody does. But he'll know how to stand, because the man raising him finally learned how, and learned it late, and learned it the expensive way, and would not trade the lesson back for all the equity in that stone house on the river.